I received a frustrating message from my sister. She told me she had left my disabled daughter at my house. Panic set in, and I rushed home, only to find my daughter crying uncontrollably outside. I couldn't trust my sister to look after my kids anymore. It was time to show her what family truly meant. I'm Amanda, 43 years old, and I love baking. Ever since I was a kid, I've enjoyed trying new things in the kitchen. You'd think I'd be really good by now, right? Well, I am. Mostly. The only thing I struggle with is chiffon cakes. My kids like to tease me, saying, "Mom, your chiffon cake is so dry." Don't worry, we'll help you next time. But I'm a star when it comes to muffins. My kids' friends often say, "We wish you were our mom." My own kids just smile proudly, knowing that I'm their mom. These little moments of joy are what make family life special, or at least, that's what I thought. But my sister Kathy's idea of family was different. This story starts a few years ago during spring break when my family visited my parents' house. We were watching TV when Kathy suddenly said, "There are so many kids with developmental disabilities lately, I wonder why." Her comment was strange and out of place. The TV wasn't even talking about disabilities. Everyone, including my mom and husband, looked at her, puzzled. "What's with the sudden comment?" I asked. Kathy explained. A colleague's child was recently diagnosed with a developmental disability. Apparently, kids who are restless or struggle at school might have one. I think Sarah might have one too. Sarah is Kathy's daughter, my niece. She always seemed like a normal child to me. Why would Kathy think that? Well, compared to Ken, she's not as smart, her language skills are underdeveloped, and her memory isn't great, Kathy said. I was shocked. My husband, Mom, and I exchanged worried looks. None of us were experts on developmental disabilities, but nothing about Sarah seemed unusual, but Kathy seemed very focused on it. "You just don't get it, Amanda," Kathy said, frustrated. "I've been researching developmental disabilities. I know what I'm talking about." At the time, we didn't take her seriously, thinking she would talk to a doctor if she was really concerned. By the time summer came, Kathy's attitude had changed. "I knew it. Sarah has a developmental disability," Kathy declared proudly, as if she had solved a big mystery. "Did you take her to a doctor?" my mom asked. Kathy said, "No, I have proof." "Stop talking like she's a criminal," my mom said, but Kathy kept going. "Sarah starts elementary school next year and still can't write the alphabet. She's in kindergarten." "That's not normal," I replied. "That's perfectly normal. Even my daughter struggles with some letters," Kathy responded. "That's because your daughter takes after you." Her husband, Tim, added, "Maybe your daughter has a developmental disability too. Like mother, like daughter." I wanted to be angry, but I held it in. Kids develop at their own pace. There's no need to rush, I said firmly, but Kathy wouldn't listen. "Ken could write the alphabet a long time ago," she insisted, comparing Sarah to her older brother, who was very bright. "Ken is 3 years older," I pointed out. "It's unfair to compare them," Tim scoffed. "Well, from a medical perspective, Sarah clearly has a developmental disability." I was shocked. "Tim, you're not a doctor," I said. It was clear that Kathy and Tim had convinced themselves that Sarah was deficient just because she wasn't meeting the high standards they had for Ken. It wasn't just frustrating, it was heartbreaking. Tim often boasted about his intelligence, using his siblings' achievements as if they were his own. For the record, Tim graduated from a private university, but not by choice. He failed the National University Entrance Exam because he ignored his teacher's advice not to take it. Now, he manages a supermarket, yet he insists he's just as smart as his siblings. If you're wondering what he's talking about, you're not alone. I later learned that Tim was somewhat of an outcast in his own family, which might explain his need to constantly prove himself. But his behavior didn't just stop with self-praise. It also affected how he and Kathy treated their daughter, Sarah. One day, my husband Mike suggested that maybe a professional should evaluate Sarah. This might help clarify things. "Oh, I've already consulted professionals," Kathy quickly replied. A silence fell, and we all had the same confused thought. "What do you mean by professionals?" Mike asked. "I've watched health programs on TV," Kathy explained, "and their observations matched Sarah's symptoms perfectly, so it must be accurate." We all sighed in frustration. Tim backed her up, saying, "Those specials are very informative." A colleague of mine saw one, took their child to the doctor, and the diagnosis was the same. "It's serious stuff." Mom had had enough. "TV is just TV. Stop using it as your source for medical advice. If you're really concerned, take Sarah to a real doctor," she said. Kathy snapped back, Stay out of our parenting. You're all so ignorant. With that, she stormed out, dragging Tim and Ken with her, leaving Sarah behind without a word. Mom sighed deeply. If they're going to act so high and mighty, at least they should take proper care of Sarah. Sarah, meanwhile, was playing with my daughter, smiling as usual, but I noticed that sometimes her smile faded, replaced by a brief look of sadness. She must have realized her family had left without her. It broke my heart. Sarah shouldn't have to bear the weight of our adult mistakes. I was more certain than ever that she didn't have a developmental disability. Instead, she was the victim of neglect and favoritism. Later that day, Kathy and Tim returned home, smiling with shopping bags in hand. Mom's face darkened. "Do you often leave Sarah behind when you go out shopping?" she asked. "It's just leaving her at home. What's the problem?" Kathy shrugged. "The problem is you don't leave Ken behind. Why treat Sarah differently?" Mom countered. Kathy argued. "She doesn't listen, so we're teaching her discipline." "Discipline her if you must, but don't just abandon her without explanation. That's cruel," Mom replied. Tim defensively said, "We provide her with meals and a good education. Why do you keep criticizing us?" "That's the bare minimum for parenting," I said sharply. "You act like it's some grand favor. This is a family matter. Stay out of it." "Amanda," Tim snapped. "Sarah is my family too," I shot back. "She's my niece. If she's being mistreated, I won't stay silent." My words seemed to hit a nerve. Kathy and Tim avoided looking at me, but their silence said everything. Mike added, "If you suspect Sarah has a developmental disability, leaving her alone is even more irresponsible." Kathy defended herself, saying, "That's why we're teaching her to stay home alone." The argument went on for hours, with no resolution, and eventually, Kathy and Tim left early, cutting their visit short. The favoritism towards Ken was painfully obvious during their stay. If Ken's favorite shrimp was served, Kathy and Tim would give him extra portions, even taking from Sarah's plate. Sarah, clearly used to this treatment, never protested. She just complained quietly, with a resigned look on her face. This pattern repeated in other ways. Promises of new toys and games were made to Ken, while Sarah was ignored. All family conversations revolved around Ken's achievements, leaving Sarah to sit quietly on the sidelines. It was heartbreaking. One day, Kathy showed up unannounced with Sarah. "Can you take care of her just for today?" she asked. Sarah looked confused and softly said, "I could just play in the park instead." We agreed to look after her. When Kathy returned later, she seemed apologetic, saying, "Thanks for watching Sarah. Why the short notice?" I asked. Kathy casually replied, "Ken had friends over, doctors and lawyers. It'd be awkward to have Sarah around." I was stunned. "You're ashamed of your own daughter?" I said. Kathy shrugged, laughing. "She doesn't fit in with those families. What can I do?" "That's no excuse," I said firmly. "Whether Sarah has a disability or not, she's your daughter. You should be her biggest supporter, not her biggest critic." Kathy's smile vanished. "You've only raised one child. Don't lecture me," she snapped, pulling Sarah by the arm and leaving. This pattern continued. Kathy and Tim would leave Sarah with us for long periods while they took Ken on elaborate outings. They'd show up late to pick her up, offer no apologies, and act like nothing was wrong. Their actions only made me more determined to step in. Sarah deserved better, and I was going to make sure she got it. One day, I was furious. "I told you to call before coming over. Why didn't you stick to the agreed time?" I was sharper than usual, even in front of Sarah. "Oh, don't be so picky," Kathy replied casually. "We're here to pick her up, aren't we?" "That's a given," I snapped. "But you can't just drop her off carelessly without proper planning." Kathy smirked. "What's with you lately? Always so irritated? Is it menopause?" Tim burst out laughing, finding her comment hilarious. I clenched my fists, struggling to stay calm. "You two are unbelievable. I keep repeating myself, you're not raising your kids right." "We are thinking about it," Kathy shot back. "That's why Ken is involved in so many activities. Unlike your daughter, who doesn't do anything. We respect our daughter's wishes, because she doesn't want to participate." "Well, we're respecting Ken's wishes too, aren't we?" Kathy said, turning to him. Ken nodded weakly, his forced smile showing his true feelings. "See," Kathy said triumphantly, "even Ken agrees." I sighed deeply. I'm tired of repeating myself. "Fine, just take Sarah and go." Kathy grabbed Sarah by the arm and practically dragged her to the car. Tim didn't say a word as he started the engine. We stood there feeling defeated once again. The next day, while I was out shopping, I got a text from Kathy. "Hey Amanda, you love Sarah, right?" I was confused and replied, "Of course I do. She's my niece. Why are you asking?" Her response left me stunned. Great. Perfect. Consider her your daughter now. I left her at your doorstep. I didn't see anyone home, so hurry back. She might be crying alone. I froze in the middle of the store, rereading her message in disbelief. Was this a joke? I called her immediately, but her phone was off. Panic set in as I abandoned my cart and rushed home. When I arrived, my heart sank. Sarah was sitting on the ground in front of the door, crying uncontrollably. Her face was buried in her hands, her small body shaking with sobs. Sarah, I ran to her and pulled her into a hug. She clung to me tightly, tears soaking my shoulder. It's okay, sweetheart, I'm here. It was clear what had happened. Even without asking, Kathy had abandoned her. Calls to Kathy and Tim's phones went unanswered. They had deliberately cut off contact. Through her tears, Sarah whispered, "Auntie, I didn't want to be left like that." I held her close, my anger boiling over. How could they be so cruel? Right then and there, I made a promise to Sarah and to myself, I would protect her. She didn't deserve this. Within a week, my husband, mother-in-law, and I went to Kathy's house to confront them. We brought legal paperwork to formalize Sarah's adoption. Our plan was clear: Sarah would become our daughter. To our surprise, Kathy and Tim agreed without much resistance. Less burden for us, Kathy said dismissively as she signed the papers. Her lack of remorse infuriated me, but I held my tongue. Sarah's well-being was my only priority. 3 months later, Kathy showed up at our house unexpectedly. "We want Sarah back," she said, as if the past few months had never happened. "What are you talking about?" I asked, incredulous. Kathy replied smugly, "I just found out she won an art contest. Her painting was displayed at the bank. We didn't even know she liked to draw." I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. Of course you didn't know, because you never paid attention to her. That contest? I submitted her artwork myself. Her preschool has been encouraging you to nurture her talents for years, but you ignored them. Kathy flushed with embarrassment. "Well, it doesn't matter now, just give her back." I shook my head. "It's not that simple. The adoption is finalized. Sarah is our daughter now, but if she wants to go back to you, I won't stop her. She'll choose me," Kathy said smugly. "Watch." I called Sarah into the room. When she saw Kathy, she hesitated, then clung to me. "Mama," she said softly, the name she had started using to combine mom and auntie. Kathy reached for her, but Ken stepped in front of his mother protectively. "Ken, what are you doing here? Don't you have lessons?" Kathy demanded. Ken's voice trembled as he replied, "I don't want to go to lessons anymore. I hate them. I hate everything you make me do." Kathy tried to scold him, but I stopped her. "Don't you get it? Your children don't want what you're forcing on them. You've been so focused on appearances and achievements that you've completely ignored their happiness." Kathy stood there speechless. "Just go home," I said firmly. "You've lost the right to call yourself their mother." In the years that followed, our family dynamic flourished. Sarah, Ken, and our daughter grew close, forming a bond stronger than I could have imagined. Ken moved in with my mother, and Sarah thrived in our home, pursuing her passion for art. Though the road was challenging, it was worth every step. Our two-family household was filled with love, laughter, and the joy of watching the kids grow into their unique talents. Meanwhile, Kathy and Tim drifted into isolation, burdened by the consequences of their selfishness. Our lives weren't perfect, but they were rich with the one thing that mattered most: family.